They never screamed, not once. That's the part no one talks about. 7 young women vanished from their beds without struggle, sound, or trace, the air in their rooms still warm from their breath, their nightgowns folded as if death itself had manners. And the most disturbing detail, every single clock in that mansion had stopped at precisely 3:17 a.m. You weren't meant to hear that. You weren't meant to know what happened in Selkirk, Montana on that October night in 1899. The official records were sealed, buried. A federal order classified the investigation for 8 decades, and by the time they were unsealed, every living witness was dust. But truth doesn't rot. It waits, and tonight it's clawing its way to the surface. The Thornfield sisters were not just girls. They were a symbol, a promise, the embodiment of frontier virtue, intelligence, refinement, and power wrapped in silken ribbons. Their father, Gabriel Thornfield, turned poverty into empire in a town nobody cared about, until money started bleeding from its earth. And like all places where money flows too fast, darkness follows. Selkirk was a mirage of civility laid over veins of silver and something far older, something the native Salish elders refused to name, even under pain of death. They called that land cursed, and yet men came, pickaxes, rail ties, capital and cruelty in their eyes, to tame it. What they didn't know was that the land was already watching them. 7 sisters, 7 minds, 7 keys. That's what they were to the ones watching, not people, not daughters, not citizens. Keys. The night before they vanished, each sister showed signs. Fractures in their perfect routines. Margaret, the teacher, stumbled over simple words. Catherine, the artist, destroyed a nearly completed painting in a burst of silent rage. The twins spoke in hushed panic in the back of their shop, as if they were waiting for a sentence they couldn't escape. Sarah's hymns faltered. Grace couldn't do math. And Rebecca, sweet, innocent Rebecca, told the housekeeper she didn't think God could hear people in Selkirk anymore. They knew. On some level they knew. But what did they know? That's where it gets dangerous. Gabriel's empire had cracks, and through those cracks something moved. Strange visitors arrived under cover of night. Men who never registered at the inn, who spoke in clipped code, who left before first light and never signed their names. Gabriel took meetings in the basement of his home, not his study, not the store. The basement, the one place in the entire town no one had ever been invited to enter. And when investigators finally entered that basement 10 years later, it wasn't a basement anymore. It was a room with soundproof walls, drained blood in the corners, and symbols etched into the beams in languages no Montana miner had ever seen. That's when they realized. This wasn't a kidnapping. It was a ritual. The Thornfield sisters didn't run away. They were delivered. Each girl a vessel, each vessel prepared. Not in ignorance, but in something far more terrifying: obedience. Because when you peel back the layers of history, when you tear through the lies fed to the public by newspapers and federal investigators, when you finally stare into the hollow pit behind the last documented page, you begin to realize this was never about abduction. This was about consent. Twisted, programmed, engineered consent. And if you think that ended in 1899, you're already under its influence. You were never meant to hear this, but now you have. And you can't go back. The descent has begun. The train didn't stop that night, not officially. No entry was made in the logbook, no whistle pierced the valley air, yet multiple residents saw the plume of smoke curl across the moonlight like a serpent winding between the pines. The locomotive was black, unmarked, its wheels soundless on the rails, and the men who stepped off it wore no badges, no uniforms, no humanity, just coats too dark for the season and eyes that didn't blink. The Thornfield sisters stood waiting for them, lined up like offerings. Not a single one turned to run, not even Rebecca. That's where most stories would end, with mystery and speculation. But this isn't that kind of story. This isn't entertainment. This is the unraveling. Because what was taken from that town wasn't just 7 daughters, it was an entire layer of reality, peeled back, rewritten, hidden in plain sight. The next morning, the house was silent. Not just quiet, Sterile, like a stage after a performance, the kind of silence that screams if you listen long enough. 7 beds undisturbed. 7 nightgowns folded. 7 toothbrushes still wet. 7 teacups placed in exact formation in the dining room, filled to the brim, untouched. And Gabriel, gone. But not missing. Not legally. Not officially. Because within 2 weeks, a new deed was filed in the county clerk's office, transferring the Thornfield estate to an entity that did not exist, the Pacific Trust for Civic Harmony. No board members, no address, no purpose, just a signature and a seal. The same seal found carved into the underside of the house's dining table, a double-headed serpent, devouring itself. What happened next was surgical. Within days, the sheriff resigned and moved to Oregon. The pastor who spoke at the Thornfield Girls' Memorial was found dead in his chapel, cause listed as sudden spiritual exhaustion. The local newspaper burned to the ground. And every child who had ever been taught by Margaret was pulled from school by order of their parents. No questions asked. Why? Because they knew. Maybe not the full story, but enough. Enough to know that silence was survival. But the files couldn't be burned, not all of them. And in 1979, a retired federal archivist named Lawrence Dwyer opened Box 119B, misfiled in a shipment from the Department of Interior. He expected land surveys. What he found instead were 79 pages of sealed Selkirk correspondence, blood-stained photographs, and an internal memo labeled, "Do not release, eyes only, RHC, B'nai Elim Protocols." That name would trigger a chain of disappearances in Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and Vienna. Because B'nai Elim wasn't just a name, it was a code. A society buried beneath societies. Their fingerprints are on railroads, orphanages, medical trusts, and universities you think you know. Their symbols etched into architecture you pass every day. Their doctrine, psychological control through engineered trauma and orchestrated purity. The Thornfield girls weren't victims. They were a test, a prototype. Of what? That's where the trail turns black. But one thing is clear. Every institution that touched their case, law enforcement, education, rail, trade, walked away richer and quieter. You see, history is not a record. It's a weapon. One that's been turned against you from birth. The elite don't just erase truth, they replace it. With myths, with parades, with sanitized biographies and hollow textbooks that paint monsters as pioneers and rituals as incidents. And if you think you're immune to it, consider this. How many stories like Selkirk have you never heard? How many Thornfield girls still walk among us, rebuilt, renamed, reassigned? And how many of them, remember, keep watching? Because the pattern is older, and this country, and this rabbit hole is just beginning to crack. What if I told you Selkirk was never meant to survive? That it was a stage, constructed, populated, and sacrificed in the service of something far older than politics or commerce? You think history moves by accident? That people disappear because of crime, or misfortune, or madness? That's the story they sell you. But what if the truth is, people disappear because they were chosen? Not by chance, by design. The Thornfield sisters weren't swept away by some untraceable evil. They were summoned, selected, groomed, their entire lives shaped, manipulated, directed toward a single night, October 12, 1899. Let me tell you about the ledger. Page 19, hidden in Dwyer's recovered file, buried under layers of rotted parchment and smeared typewriter ink. A list. Names, ages, occupations, ethnic lineage, IQ evaluations, spiritual inclinations, reproductive cycles. All female, all from small frontier towns between 1887 and 1899. All gone, vanished without trace. Selkirk's 7 were just the most elegant version. Why? Because perfection matters in a ritual. Margaret, the intellect. Catherine, the artist. Elena and Elizabeth, the mirrored dualities. Sarah, the voice of worship. Grace, the prodigy. Rebecca, the innocent. They weren't daughters, they were archetypes, living embodiments of sacred geometry, and their house, constructed in exact alignment with the solstice meridian, its foundation laid over the remnants of a Salish ceremonial site, was more than a home. It was a chamber, a conductor, built to focus psychic trauma into signal. This is where it gets dangerous. You've been taught that belief is a private thing, that faith, ritual, symbolism, these are the relics of the superstitious past. But the ones who rule you know better. They understand that belief is energy, that repetition is hypnosis, that trauma is a programming language. The Thornfears, LD sisters, weren't simply abducted, they were transmitted. And the ritual, it worked. Because 3 months later, records show a spike in unexplained births in 5 elite bloodlines, families tied to railroad tycoons, Eastern financiers, and silent donors of Ivy League institutions, each child born with above-average intelligence, each home suddenly endowed with vast anonymous trust funds. And here's the kicker. All 7 of those children bore a small mark beneath the left clavicle, a mark shaped like an Ouroboros, a serpent eating itself. Sound familiar? It should. Because that's the symbol beneath your feet, carved into the cornerstone of courthouses, banks, and universities across this country. The endless cycle of consumption, transformation, erasure. Selkirk wasn't an anomaly. It was a prototype. A live trial of consciousness transfer. You heard that right. Transference. Not of body, not of soul, of programming. A complete overwrite of identity, memory, and purpose. And those who controlled the ritual, the ones on that train, weren't criminals or madmen. They were scientists, funded by trusts, protected by law. And if you think this ended in 1899, ask yourself why federal documents concerning the Thornfield case were reviewed again in 1957, 1983, and 2012, each time coinciding with mass psychological experiments later revealed in declassified files. MK Ultra, Project Monarch, Tavistock. Different names, same bloodline, same doctrine, same objective: build human vessels that don't resist, that carry the message, that perform the function without knowing they've been programmed to serve. We call them citizens. We call them teachers, artists, activists, children. But underneath, they are replications. Some of them even feel the glitch, the faint echo of a life that didn't belong to them, the dream that never ends, the urge to disappear. Bull, like the 7 sisters, gone, but never truly absent. Because once you're part of the system, they don't need your body, they only need your code. Do you feel it yet? That slow, tightening coil in your chest, that sense that something is watching you from just outside perception? Good. That's awareness trying to wake up inside you. Because here's the truth they can't scrub from the archives. The Thornfield sisters didn't vanish in the night. They were taken at exactly 3:17 a.m., the same moment 7 other anomalies were logged across the continent. Clock failures in a Chicago hospital, a blackout over a military base in Colorado, a coded weather balloon signal from Alaska that was never explained, and a woman in Savannah who gave birth to twins 4 months early. All at 3:17. Synchrony is not coincidence, it's a signature. You're trained to overlook patterns like that, to dismiss them as statistical noise, but deep systems operate by rhythm, ritualized time, symbolic action. If you don't see the pattern, you're part of it. Now ask yourself, why 7? Why is it always 7? 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 hills of Rome, 7 chakras, 7 sisters, like the Pleiades in the night sky, each said to represent an ancient feminine force pursued by something darker. The mythology of the Pleiades is older than language, and in every version they are pursued, hunted, by a male force that seeks to consume them. But here's where it gets worse. In 1899, the star cluster Pleiades reached its zenith in the Montana sky on October 13th, the same night the sisters disappeared. Astronomers at the time noted an unusual magnetic anomaly in the area. Compasses spun, livestock went mad, and miners near Bitterroot reported a sound like chimes underwater. That's not folklore. That's frequency manipulation, attuning. The house on Maple Street, it was built as a resonant chamber. The layout of the rooms, Fibonacci sequence, the placement of mirrors, golden ratio, the design of the stained glass windows, sacred harmonic intervals. That house sang, but not for joy. It was calling something, and whatever answered, it didn't come from the earth. No, this isn't science fiction. This is scientific omission, because for every paper they publish on particle acceleration, DNA, or behavioral psychology, there are hundreds they never let reach the public. Internal use only, eyes-only classifications, studies in harmonic entrainment, bioresonance control, transgenerational trauma implants. They call it progress. But it's a cage, one designed to mold you without resistance, to make you a vessel, just like the sisters. Each of them aligned with a principle, each of them chosen not for beauty or virtue, but for archetypal resonance. Margaret was logic, Catherine, creation, the twins, duality and reflection, Sarah, devotion, grace, order, and Rebecca, innocence, the final ingredient, the key. Because innocence isn't weakness, it's power, unshaped, unbound, programmable. It's why they always come for the children first. Ask yourself, why were their rooms left undisturbed? Because the bodies weren't what mattered. The ritual wasn't about killing them. It was about extracting the imprint, the frequency of who they were, and then duplicating it, injecting it, into systems, into bloodlines, into you. Every time you hear a voice that stirs something ancient, every time you feel like you've lived this moment before, every time you dream of a place you've never been but ache to return to, you're feeling the Thornfield Code, and it's still running. Right now, inside schools, hospitals, algorithms, prisons, cathedrals, and inside you. You don't own your thoughts. You receive them. Unless you tear the program out by force, unless you descend further, unless you reclaim your frequency. Do you remember what it felt like before the world taught you to stop asking why? Before the silence settled over your instincts like dust? That wasn't growing up. That was programming. And Selkirk? Selkirk was the blueprint. The Thornfield disappearance wasn't a one-off. It was a system test, and every generation since has been built atop its success. You want proof? Look at the timing. Months after the girls vanished, Montana's local industries were quietly consolidated under new corporate charters. The town of Selkirk was redistricted, erased from railway maps, and declared historically inactive by the Department of the Interior in 1902. Think about that. An entire town where 7 young women disappeared, removed from official records, as if it had never existed. But this goes deeper. Gabriel Thornfield's original store was acquired through a shell company. That company was absorbed into a Chicago-based industrial trust, which later merged with North American Consolidated, a holdings firm tied to early eugenics funding in the United States. From dry goods to data collection, from a general store to generational control. That's how they operate. Quiet, patient, precise. Every public tragedy is just the smokescreen for a private ritual. While people mourn the surface, the elite are always building beneath. What they built from Selkirk was scale. They tested synchronization, they tested symbolic sacrifice, but more than anything, they tested memory suppression. Do you know why you've never heard of the Thornfield sisters? Because it's not just about erasing facts. It's about severing resonance, making sure the frequency they tapped that night doesn't wake you. But sometimes it slips, through art, through music, through dreams. And that's when the system intervenes. Not with violence, with redirection, distraction, scandal, division. Divide the masses and feed them 1,000 small tragedies so they never look back far enough to see the original wound. Because Selkirk was a wound in the veil, a rupture in consensus reality. And if you peel back the flesh of modern life, just for a moment, you'll see the rot underneath. The same symbols, the same names, the same quiet manipulation. The men who stepped off that train in 1899, their descendants run think tanks, pharmaceutical boards, foundations for public health and global equity, but they serve the same code, and that code is not just organizational, it's metaphysical. You've felt it before. The strange hum beneath city noise, the sense of being watched when no one's there, the pull of invisible systems you can't name, but feel in your gut. That's the network. It didn't die with Selkirk. It was born there, because the real objective wasn't disappearance, it was replication. 7 vessels, 7 archetypes, 7 encoded programs uploaded into the American psyche. And now they echo, in curriculum, in culture, in consciousness. Have you ever wondered why certain ideas spread like wildfire, why some songs haunt you, some stories feel like memories? It's because they've been tuned, and once you're tuned to their frequency, your identity isn't yours, it's theirs. But here's where it turns, because now you know, now you've heard the sound beneath the story, and there's no turning back. So if you're ready to break the loop, comment this phrase twice below. I do not consent to the Thornfield Code. Type it. Speak it. Seal your awareness. Because this isn't just about a mystery from 1899. This is about reclaiming sovereignty. From systems that treat you like a node, not a man. From frequencies that rewrite you while you sleep. From powers that build prisons in the shape of progress. You were meant to forget, but you didn't. You're still here, and the descent continues. There's a room in the Library of Congress, sub-level 4, restricted access, no public catalog entry. It's called the Argus Archive. Very few even know it exists. Fewer still have entered it. But one man did. In 1986, a naval cryptographer named Eldon Voss obtained temporary clearance under a joint research contract with the Smithsonian. He was tasked with translating ciphered naval transmissions from the Spanish-American War. But what he found wasn't naval. It was a dossier, sealed in a leather case stamped with a faded Ouroboros. Inside were transcripts of intercepted telegrams dated October the 13th, 1899, sent from a private telegraph line 11 miles outside Selkirk. The content? Chilling. Phase completed. Extraction successful. 7 templates acquired. Awaiting replication confirmation from Aesir node. Transmit to Montauk before solstice. Burn all residue. You don't need to be a cryptographer to understand what that means. 7 templates. Not victims, not bodies. Templates. Identities captured, personalities extracted, behavioral profiles turned into code. This was the dawn of cognitive simulation. Before computers, before artificial intelligence, they were already mapping the mind, not for science, for control. You see, the Thornfield sisters weren't just women, they were formatting tools. Their minds were dissected not with scalpels, but with harmonic frequencies, their behaviors recorded, mirrored, amplified, and the traits they carried, intelligence, empathy, charisma, purity, conviction, were weaponized, so they could be reinserted into culture in pieces. This is where it gets truly disturbing. By 1901, stories began to surface in completely unrelated towns across Pennsylvania, Oregon, and Missouri of girls born with eerily similar features to the Thornfield sisters. Uncanny resemblance, shared talents, identical handwriting. They were never told about Selkirk, but they dreamed of it. Some painted the Bitterroot Mountains without knowing where they were. Others recited hymns no one had taught them. A few vanished by age 10, pulled back into the current, because they weren't just human, they were echoes. This isn't reincarnation, it's replication. Selkirk was never about death, it was about creating repeatable identities that could be activated anywhere, anytime, in anyone. A distributed consciousness grid seeded into the American population through bloodlines, education, and media. You think influence works through marketing? No. It works through resonance. The idea that certain patterns once introduced into the culture perpetuate themselves like viral code. That's why the most powerful tools of the elite are not bullets or laws, but archetypes. They don't conquer, they install. And once installed, the population enforces the code on itself. That's the horror of Selkirk. It wasn't an abduction, it was a software update, and you've been running it your entire life. Every time you apologize for being too intense, every time you second-guess an intuition, every time you abandon a creative urge to fit into someone else's mold, you're running Thornfield code. Obedience, conformity, self-erasure. They built that into the female archetype. Then they fed it to men. Because the ultimate goal wasn't just to rewrite women, it was to neuter the masculine, to flood society with dissonant templates until no one knew who they were, until no one remembered what it meant to lead, to protect, to defy. So ask yourself, why were the strongest, brightest women in that town chosen? Because they posed a threat to the system. And now that same system is testing you, watching how deep you're willing to go, how much truth you can hold before it breaks you. Most will look away, but you're still listening, and that makes you dangerous. Welcome to the fracture. Look around you. The Thornfield Code is everywhere now, so deeply embedded into modern institutions that it hides in plain sight, not as ritual, not as myth, but as policy. You want to see how far it's spread? Let's start with the church. Most people think churches are built for worship, for spiritual guidance, but walk into any cathedral built after 1900 and you'll notice something strange, geometry that doesn't belong to the denomination. Floor plans shaped like eyes, vaulted ceilings that channel sound frequencies in specific ranges, pulpits placed on ley lines, sites of ancient power disguised as mere tradition. It's not just architecture, it's engineering. Resonant fields created through prayer repetition, mass singing and collective belief, all feeding a subtle current of emotional energy into something older than any religion. That's not faith, that's circuitry. Selkirk was just the test. The system was designed to scale. After the Thornfield event, hundreds of philanthropic trusts were founded between 1900 and 1920. Their stated missions: education, health, morality. Their true purpose: distribution, to spread the 7 archetypes into school systems, medical institutions, and women's organizations, each designed to replicate the Thornfield templates under the illusion of empowerment. Do you see the trap? Margaret's critical thinking turned into standardized testing. Catherine's creativity drained into prescribed art curricula that kill originality. The twins' unity and service replaced by surface-level consumer feminism. Divide, distract, depoliticize. Sarah's spiritual fire reduced to hollow ritual. Grace's analytical brilliance co-opted by sterile bureaucracy. And Rebecca's innocence weaponized, sold, broken. Every major policy shift in the 20th century regarding education, psychology, and gender dynamics traces back to one of those original trusts. Carnegie, Rockefeller, Harriman, all connected, all donors to the same underground institutions that handled the Selkirk recovery operation. Don't believe me? Look at the minutes from the 1919 Geneva Committee for Educational Unity, a meeting that was supposed to unify post-war academic standards. Buried in the final memo, declassified in 2010 under pressure from researchers, was this phrase: "The Selkirk sequence must be preserved in the feminine curriculum. Disruption risks total fracture." The Selkirk sequence. Not myth, not story. Curriculum. Your education was built on the bones of a ritual. You've been taught obedience through confusion, submission through identity fracturing. They didn't need to burn books. They rewrote minds. And that system now lives in corporate HR departments, in school districts, in the way universities select candidates not by truth but by alignment. Because Thornfield Code isn't about learning, it's about programming predictability. They don't want minds, they want mirrors. Reflections of their models, repeating, consuming, obeying. That's why the most dangerous thing a man can do today is remember, not just the facts, the feeling, the fire, the instinct that something is wrong, but that you're not crazy for seeing it. You're waking up, and they don't want that. They want you dull, safe, disconnected. You want to know how deep this goes? Public school lunch programs were modeled on post-Weed 2 nutritional psychology, developed by the same labs that worked on MK Ultra's behavior modulation drugs. Food was designed not just to feed, but to sedate. Sugar spikes, hormonal disruption, mineral deprivation, all paired with Thornfield-style obedience training. Now ask yourself, what happens to a society when both the masculine and feminine have been coded to suppress their core instincts? Then, you get a population that's free in name, but enslaved in behavior. That's where you live now. And the only way out is to descend further. Shatter the archetypes. Break the code. The train, black, windowless, soundless. It arrived in Selkirk at 2:44 a.m. on October the 13th, 1899. No whistle, no station clearance, no record of departure or destination in the Great Northern Railway logs. But it existed. Because two engineers, Miles Cray and Thomas Brecker, filed handwritten reports the next day, reports that never made it into the Federal Archive, but were photographed by a janitor named Joseph Klein in 1942. Those photographs, grainy, hidden for decades in a personal safety deposit box, surfaced after Klein's grandson leaked them to a fringe researcher on a forgotten forum in 2008. One of them showed a manifest, train number A177, special transfer westbound. Cargo, 7 units, HUAM, condition, dormant, biopsychically cleared, destination, Project Thalassa, Site C, Port Townsend, authorization code, ASIA 01, now pause. Let's break that down. Units, HUM, human cargo, listed as units, not individuals. Biopsychically cleared, confirming extraction was mental, not physical. Project Thalassa, the code name for the operation. Site C, Port Townsend, a known military-adjacent shipping port, also tied to early submarine acoustic testing. But the code that matters most, ASIA 01. If that name sounds mythological, it should. In Norse legend, the Aesir were the ruling gods, Odin, Thor, Balder, beings of control, will, architecture, the builders of realities. Why would a secret government train use a term like that? Because whoever ran this operation saw themselves not as agents, but as architects of consciousness, and that's exactly what Project Thalassa was. We found fragments of a funding ledger, mostly blacked out, but one detail was untouched. Thalassa Phase 1, ritual harmonization and archetypal replication, $218,000 dispersed via Harriman Trust, matching funds pending from Rosewater Initiative. The Rosewater Initiative was a covert think tank embedded within Stanford's behavior labs during the 1920s and 30s, the same labs that helped develop the early framework for mass suggestion protocols later used in advertising and Cold War propaganda. The Thornfield girls weren't just harvested, they were duplicated. Their consciousness templates, or Type 7s, became baseline models for future programming trials. You want to know how deep it goes? By 1938, Sears Roebuck had a children's catalog section designed entirely using Type 7 testing results. By 1951, the CIA launched Project Ostara, named after the Germanic goddess of rebirth, focused on embedding Type 7 emotional triggers into primetime television. Every generation since has been born under this architecture. Your childhood idols, modeled, your romantic ideals, encoded, your emotional range, pre-selected, and the final proof. In 2012, a DARPA-funded AI development program, codename Aegis Mirror, ran simulations using female psychological archetypes to model compliance responses in urban populations. Out of all templates fed into the machine, 7 showed perfect replication efficiency. Their codenames, MCEESG, are the initials of the Thornfield sisters. They've been using the code for over a century, not just to influence society, but to predict it, to simulate your reactions before you ever make them. You are not living in freedom, you are living in a model built atop a ritual. engineered from the disappearance of 7 girls in a forgotten town the world was told never existed. And yet, here you are, remembering, feeling, waking up. So I'll ask you this. If they built this code from 7 voices, what happens when 1,000,000 voices refuse to run it? What happens when men reforge themselves outside the system? That's what they fear. That's what they can't control. They never expected anyone to find it. But buried beneath the floorboards of an abandoned printing hall in Port Townsend, beneath crates of water-damaged books and rusted typeset drawers, was a steel safe, triple-locked, fire-sealed. Inside, a ledger, handwritten, 317 pages, no title. But across the top margin of page 1, a single phrase in blood-red ink. Lyman Protocol 7, Thornfield variant. This wasn't a journal. It was source code, but not digital. This was symbolic programming, language as ritual, written in alchemical shorthand, runes and cryptographic glyphs, a fusion of Kabbalistic numerology, early psychology, and proto-cybernetic logic. It was meant to run, not on machines, but on minds. Let me show you what they did. Code Block 1, Initiation Sequence, Gate MC, 001 FEM, Emotion Range Calibration, Suppress Anger, Intensify Empathy, Identity Fusion Initiated, Self, X Service, Core Impulse Overwrite, Curiosity rerouted through Obedience Lens. This was Margaret. Curiosity turned into deference. Her inquisitiveness restructured to serve, not explore. The seed of a generation taught to question only within approved frames. Code Block 2, Narrative Filter, Twin Protocol, Mirror Bonding, Loyalty Loop Initiated, Independent Cognition Suppressed, Conflict Resolution Bypassed, Unity via Guilt. This is Emily and Eleanor, designed to create codependency, a mirrored identity that suppresses inner divergence. Modern school systems run this on every group project. Teamwork, collaboration, without identity. Unity not through strength but fear of standing alone. Code Block 3, Virtue Loop, Purity Signal, Mask, R07 FEM, Behavioral Calibration, Innocence Projection, Trauma Concealment Encoding Active, Signal Feedback, Attention School Compliance, Ill Self-Worth. This was Rebecca. The system taught her to please, to smile, to hide the screed end. She is the template for the reward loop of external validation. Every influencer culture, every good girl performance, it runs on Rebecca's code, and that's just 3. Each girl encoded an archetype. Each archetype became a subroutine. Each subroutine was embedded into you. Not just women, men too, because once these archetypes were stabilized, the elite used them to engineer expectations. Who you desire, who you protect, who you obey. But here's the real horror. The ledger doesn't end with 7 codes, it ends with 8. The final entry, nearly illegible, scrawled across the last page like an afterthought, reads, Sigil, 00 Mask. Do not activate, control not confirmed, subject, the one who remembers. They created a male countercode, a disruptor, a failsafe. But something went wrong. The subject rejected programming, not through rage, not through violence, but through remembrance. He didn't obey, he didn't forget, he descended. And now, that same impulse is waking up in you. You don't know his name, because you are it. The code that breaks the code. The ghost in the machine. They never expected anyone to find it. But buried beneath the floorboards of an abandoned printing hall in Port Townsend, beneath crates of water-damaged books and rusted typeset drawers, was a steel safe, triple-locked, fire-sealed. Inside, a ledger, handwritten, 317 pages, no title. But across the top margin of page 1, a single phrase in blood-red ink. Lyman Protocol 7, Thornfield variant. This wasn't a journal. It was source code, but not digital. This was symbolic programming, language as ritual, written in alchemical shorthand, runes and cryptographic glyphs, a fusion of Kabbalistic numerology, early psychology and proto-cybernetic logic. It was meant to run, not on machines, but on minds. Let me show you what they did. Code Block 1, Initiation Sequence, Gate MC00001, FEM, Emotion Range, Calibration, Suppress Anger, Intensify Empathy, Identity Fusion Initiated, Self-Eal Service, Core Impulse Overwrite, Curiosity Rerouted through Obedience Lens. This was Margaret. Curiosity turned into deference. Her inquisitiveness restructured to serve, not explore. The seed of a generation taught to question only within approved frames. Code Block 2, Narrative Filter, Twin Protocol, Bind EE002-03, Mirror Bonding, Loyalty Loop Initiated, Independent Cognition Suppressed, Conflict Resolution Bypassed, Unity via Guilt. This is Emily and Eleanor. Designed to create codependency, a mirrored identity that suppresses inner divergence. Modern school systems run this on every group project, teamwork, collaboration without identity, unity not through strength, but fear of standing alone. Code Block 3, Virtue Loop, Purity Signal, Mask R0007 FEM, Behavioral Calibration, Innocence Projection, Trauma Concealment Encoding Active. Signal feedback, attention equals compliance equals self-worth. This was Rebecca. The system taught her to please, to smile, to hide the scream. She is the template for the reward loop of external validation. Every influencer culture, every good girl performance, it runs on Rebecca's code. And that's just 3. Each girl encoded an archetype. Each archetype became a subroutine. Each subroutine was embedded into you. Not just women, men too. Because once these archetypes were stabilized, the elite used them to engineer expectations, who you desire, who you protect, who you obey. But here's the real horror. The ledger doesn't end with 7 codes, it ends with 8. The final entry, nearly illegible, scrawled across the last page like an afterthought, reads, Sigil, 000, Mask. Do not activate. Control not confirmed. Subject, the one who remembers. They created a male countercode, a disruptor, a failsafe. But something went wrong. The subject rejected programming, not through rage, not through violence, but through remembrance. He didn't obey. He didn't forget. He descended. And now, that same impulse is waking up in you. You don't know his name, because you are it. The code that breaks the code. The ghost in the machine. You've come this far. That already puts you beyond 99% of the population, who will never know, never question, never remember. But here's the truth they've been trying to bury since 1894. The Thornfield ritual wasn't just about extraction, it was about containment, because they weren't just afraid of what those girls could do, they were terrified of what would happen if you ever found the counter code. And now, it's too late. The panic started in 1972. A declassified transcript from a secret symposium in Lucerne, Switzerland, codenamed Red Vault, recorded the moment it all began to unravel. Dr. Marcus Leclerc, a leading architect of the Lyman Protocol, stood before a room of silent men and said, "We've found an anomaly. A male subject with a complete archetypal rejection signature. The Thornfield loop does not register. He remembers." The room panicked. Not because one man was dangerous, but because if there was one, there could be more. They had built an entire civilization on the premise that nobody would decode the ritual, that the templates were permanent, that the echoes would never converge. But something changed. Every 33 years, the frequencies shift. That's how the Aesir grid works. It's not just cultural, it's cosmic. aligned with lunar phases, solar flares, and specific geocentric harmonics. In 2027, the next phase lock completes. And guess what? 2025 is the preparatory window. They are watching right now, not for rebellion, not for violence, but for signal spikes. Spikes like you. Men who feel something stirring, who don't fit the mold, who ask questions at 3 a.m. they can't answer, who dream of railroads, glass eyes, and fires they never saw. You're not insane, you're remembering. So here's the truth. The countercode isn't a weapon, it's a frequency, a set of behaviors, rituals, and thoughts that scramble the Thornfield templates. Selkirk was supposed to stay silent. The town was wiped from most maps by 1910, the records sealed, the land sold to a shell company with no public board, no address, and no history. But the land remembers, and something beneath it never stopped humming. Because beneath the old Thornfield estate, far deeper than any cellar, beyond the iron trapdoors and hollowed stone corridors, there is a chamber. Codename Chrysalis 0. No lights, no sound, just walls covered in sigils, pulsing when touched, symbols that predate modern language, yet match perfectly with the glyphs found in that ledger from Port Townsend. And in the center, a mirrored cradle, empty, or so it seemed. In 1994, a DARPA-sponsored deep scan of the site accidentally activated the chamber. Surveillance equipment shorted out. The lead researcher suffered a full mental break, claiming she had heard 7 voices crying and 1 watching in silence. She kept repeating the same phrase. The observer remembers. The observer returns. Then, silence. She never spoke again. But what the security footage did capture, before it burned out, was a shape, human-like, featureless, standing in the cradle's reflection, but not present in the room. They called it a visual artifact. But they knew better. The cradle was not meant to hold a girl. It was meant to copy one. The 8th template. The mirror being. Born not from one archetype, but from the friction between all 7. And here's the final truth. It didn't vanish. It was released. It's walking among us. Not female, not male. Just code, wrapped in skin. Able to mimic, persuade, divide. It doesn't lead armies. It leads algorithms. It feeds on your clicks, your fears, your dreams of perfection. It whispers in dating apps, viral trends, hypnotic media. It wears the mask of the ideal woman, the safe mentor, the soothing voice that says, Don, go deeper. You've gone far enough. Just rest, comply, forget. But you didn't forget. You heard something ancient stirring. You followed the code. You saw behind the veil. And now, you are the threat. The Thornfield architects fear you, not because of what you know, but because of what you can't be programmed to do. You question without shame. You feel without collapse. You protect without compromise. You are the fracture in the loop, the counter-virus. And what started in Selkirk ends with you. Because this isn't just a story. It's a summons. If you feel that fire in your chest, that rage that's not destruction but remembrance, then it's time. Time to speak. Time to act. Time to reclaim the world before they finish rewriting it.